So the book I'm reading out of this morning is sort of a classic. It's Gift from the Sea by Anne Marlinberg. Sorry, my battery's dying, so we're gonna... Says, the shape of my life today starts with a family. I have a husband, 5 children, and a home just beyond the suburbs of New York. I have also a craft, writing, and therefore work I want to pursue. The shape of my life is, of course, determined by many other things. My background in childhood, my mind and its education, my conscience and its pressures, my heart and its desires. I want to give and take from my children and husband, to share with friends and community, to carry out my obligations to man and to the world, as a woman, as an artist, as a citizen. But I want, first of all, in fact, as an end to these other desires, to be at peace within myself. I want a singleness of eye, a purity of intention, a central core to my life that will enable me to carry out these obligations and activities as well as I can. I want, in fact, to borrow from the language of the saints, to live in grace as much of the time as possible. I'm not using this in a term in a strictly theological sense. By grace, I mean an inner harmony, essentially spiritual, which can be translated into outward harmony.
Reading from the book of Mark. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get in the boat and go on ahead to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up to the hillside to pray. When evening came, the boat was far out on the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. He saw that the disciples were worn out with rowing, because the wind was against them. About 3 a.m, Jesus went out to them, walking on the water. He was about to pass them by when they saw him, and thinking it was a ghost, cried out, for they had all seen him and were terrified. Jesus hastened to reassure them. "Calm yourselves. It's me. Don't be afraid." Jesus got into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed by what had happened, for they hadn't understood about the loaves. Their minds were closed.
Pray with me, please. Sacred essence. Help us to feel the calmness that Jesus had as he walked across the water. Help us to know it deep in our souls, that inner harmony, that inner grace, the peace that passes understanding, that we might bring that feeling to this moment, to this time, to inform my words and our scripture. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your light and your insight. Amen. So, the passage that Marilyn just read is very clearly a metaphor. We can't take this story literally because people don't walk on water, and they certainly don't walk on water in the middle of the wind whipping up and the waves being really high and all of that good stuff. And if we take it at a deeper than literal level, it has so much more meaning and so much more insight into who Jesus was and the example he provided and how we can live our lives intentionally seeking balance. So let me give you just a little background on this passage. So Jesus and the disciples had tried to get away from all the crowds, and of course they were followed. So he spent that entire day teaching, Scripture said, to 5,000 families. So that's a lot of people running around. And then they ended up feeding them, right? You all know the story of the feeding of the 5,000 and the loaves. And that was referenced in the passage here. So it's late by the end of this day. And the day that was supposed to be a quiet getting away together, Jesus and the disciples having some hangout time, right? Some downtime turned into this huge thing. And I can only bet that they're a little tired, right? So Jesus packs the disciples off onto the boat. And then he dismisses the crowd. And then he goes up the mountain to pray. And when he comes back down, he sees that, now, in my opinion, the boat should have been a whole lot farther off by this time. But he can still see the boat, apparently, and the disciples rowing against the wind. And then the passage says it's 3 a.m. I don't know how long he let them sit out there rowing against the wind, but 3 a.m. he finally heads out. It says he's heading out to them, and then he's going to walk past them, so that's a little odd too. But so he heads out there, and he's apparently going to miss them. And they're like, hey, oh my gosh, who's that person out there? They thought it was a ghost. And he walks up to them, and they're all freaking out. And he says, don't worry, calm yourselves. It's me. Don't be afraid. He gets in the boat, and the wind dies down. It's a pretty fantastical story, if tried to take it literally. But if we take it metaphorically, it's got so much depth to it. So let's flesh it out a little bit together, okay? The piece of Jesus where he goes up the mountain to pray. That's an important thing he does over and over again. Why does he do it? This isn't even metaphorical. This is just kind of right out there. To recenter.
Talk to God.
To talk to God. To help him find balance. To maintain his balance. Yeah, to have some time away, to get regrounded and recentered, just like you all said. Okay, so talk to me about the disciples rowing against this huge wind, which has to make the waves tremendous. Metaphorically, what does that sound like? Why?
Life is challenging.
Life is challenging.
Yeah.
What do you think is challenging in their lives right now?
Who Jesus really is.
Okay, maybe who Jesus really is.
Dealing with all the crowds.
Dealing with crowds. I mean, how is their life different from maybe, 6 months or a year and a half ago? It's hugely different, right? They left behind everything they knew and they're on this new path and they're trying to learn new things and they're trying to share it with all these people. And do they have resistance to this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure, who's resisting them? The politicians?
Pharisees.
What was that, Mike?
Pharisees.
The Pharisees, the leaders of the Jewish faith,
Their
their
family.
families, probably.
They could be resisting themselves if they were dealing with fear and doubt.
Sure. They could have their own set of doubts and misgivings and why did I do this and should I have done this and I left my family and yeah. So do you think they got a little stress going on in their lives, those disciples? Sure. So it seems to me that this wind and these waves are all of those challenges mixed together. And the fact that they don't let up, right? The wind isn't letting up for these guys. They've been out there rowing for hours against the wind. Anybody ever rowed against the wind? Or rode a bicycle against the wind? Or walked against the wind for any length of time?
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Absolutely. So they were tired to begin with after a long day. And the challenge doesn't let up in their lives. We've all had that experience where it's been one thing after another, and it feels like the wind just does not let up. And the waves keep getting higher and higher. So Jesus comes out, and he climbs into the boat, and he says, "Calm yourselves, don't be afraid." And the story says that the wind died down. What is it that Jesus had? Metaphorically, what's happening here for the disciples? He's reassuring them. How, do you think? His calmness. Right, so now we go back to the beginning of the story, right? This is how the story begins, as we see Jesus being grounded and rooted and re-energized and finding his center. And he brings that with him. He's able, even walking across these wavy waters with the wind is metaphorical, because he's remaining above it all, right? So when we stay grounded, when we stay balanced, it's a whole lot easier to kind of traverse life, to get through those challenging times when the wind is pushing against you. And he brings that sense of peace and calmness to the disciples. He quiets maybe their own inner fears that Jan mentioned, their own turmoil, just by his very presence, by that grounded, balanced energy. Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but like the original Martin Luther, the one who led the Protestant Reformation in like the 1400s, right? Was once asked by a friend, he said, "So what are you going to do tomorrow, Martin?" And Martin said, "Well, I'm going to work and work from early until late." He said, "In fact, I have so much work to do that I'm going to have to pray for 3 hours first." Yeah, think about that for a second. So, and then St. Francis de Sales once said, everybody should pray for a half an hour a day unless they're really busy. And then they should pray for an hour. It's the same message of that story, right? That in order to get through those crazy times where your life is full of challenges, you've got to stay centered. And maybe it's even harder to stay centered in those times, so that you have to take even more time to center yourself so you can face anything in a more balanced, calm, clear, aware way. So, what throws you off balance? What kinds of things throw you off balance? Deadlines. Bad news.
Unexpected things that come up during the day when you have your agenda doesn't fit with your agenda.
Right, so anything unexpected that goes against whatever you plan to do for the day. What else?
Mondays.
Mondays? Every Monday Mike's unbalanced. What else? Conflict, sure.
When you think with your heart instead of your head.
When you think with your heart instead of your head. That's interesting.
Physical pain.
Physical pain. Yeah, absolutely. Can throw you off balance. What else?
Committing to too much.
Committing to too much. Sure. Or not even committing to it, just having to do it. Life. What else? Anything else done?
Getting caught up in the news.
Getting caught up in the news. Yes, that can unbalance the best of us.
Preparing for guests and doing taxes.
Preparing for guests and doing taxes. natural disasters. Should the storm we had, going on, having our power go out, having the tree limbs go down, all that kind of stuff. It's something every day. You know, my emissions light went off. Well, that threw me off balance for a few days. All kinds of things. Sometimes I just wake up off balance because, I don't know, I dreamt funny or something, right? We got up on the wrong side of the bed is how we say that. So how does it feel? Slightly different type of question. How do you feel when you are off balance? Uncomfortable? Anxious? Irritable? Frustrated? Rushed? Stressed? Out of control? Overwhelmed? Frightened? Exhausted? Not feeling well? And sometimes I feel like I can't do anything right in the midst of that. It's harder to make a clear decision. So all of those things play in when we're feeling off balanced. Anne Morrow Lindbergh talks about it as feeling an inner harmony. Same concept. You know, here she's dealing with a husband and 5 kids and trying to write, and all the house stuff and all that stuff, and she's like, I just want an inner harmony. I just want an inner peace. And of course she's writing this book from like the beach, right? Because she got to go away in order to find that inner harmony so that she could write. But we don't usually have that luxury to be able to go away, to go up a mountain and pray, to take the time out to get centered and rebalanced. So let's try a little exercise once. I want you to stand up. So Julie's going to come over here and help me out. But I want you to find a stance that's balanced for you. Okay, because if I'm not balanced, Julie can probably push me over pretty easily. I think she's enjoying that a little too much. But, so what do we do when we balance, right? We put our feet a little bit apart. We don't lock our knees, right? I tell people at weddings, do not lock your knees because it's easier to go down that way. If our knees are just a little bit bent, be nice to me. But now try and push me over. Well, I was going to go sideways, but I'm not nearly as, push me sideways. And if I do it, okay, you can go sit down. Do you feel balanced as you're standing right now?
Yes.
Okay, so have a seat once. I don't know how many of you've ever played sports, but you hear this in just about every sport, that you have to have a stance that's balanced. Whether you're playing soccer or tennis or racquetball or basketball or baseball or whatever it is, you can't be all on one foot because you're not going to be able to move quickly in a certain direction, right? I can remember playing soccer and it was like both feet, and if you can, you're going back and forth between the feet because you want to be able to move if somebody's going that way. If they cut a certain way, you want to be able to cut with them, right? If I'm on that foot solidly and they cut that way, I have to take 2 steps to turn and go. But if I'm balanced, all I have to do is take 1 step and turn and go. Being balanced, the whole point is that it enables us to have the flexibility to move with whatever's happening in our lives. And too often, that's a physical example, but there's emotionally and spiritually and mentally and intellectually balanced. And when we try and maintain all of that, it gets to be a lot, I get it. But when you're in that place of balance, it's amazing. I was thinking about it was another sports metaphor. It had to do with balance, which is, in fact, Julie used to be a pitcher, and so we were talking about baseball. And I said, well, as a pitcher, you not only have to remain balanced on your feet, but you also, part of your balance is being aware of everything that's going on around you. So you know if somebody's trying to steal second base or third base, or they're trying to run home, or you know where your team is, so you know who you can throw to and when you can throw to them, and you know what's going on with the batter and the catcher, right? But if you're not focused and grounded and centered, if your brain's somewhere else and you're distracted, you are not seeing the game clearly to be able to move with the changes around you. It's all part of this staying balanced piece for each of us. And it's an intentional sort of thing. So let me ask you this. You know what it feels like to be off balance. You know what throws you off balance. How do you get your balance back? Stopping? Just stopping?
Resting.
Okay, resting.
Take a break.
Taking a break.
Meditating.
Meditating.
Talking to family.
Talking to family.
Taking big deep breaths.
Taking deep breaths. Yes, that's a good way.
Napping.
Napping. What else rebalances you? Have a cookie?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's your problem, Mike. Monday morning, have a cookie.
Journaling.
Journaling, sure.
Kayaking and camping.
Kayaking and camping.
Reprioritizing.
Reprioritizing. Okay. For me, sometimes it's taking a walk. When it's summer, getting outside and doing a little gardening. If I'm really stressed, Julia will come home and find me playing the piano. Or a journal. Sometimes those work best if I'm actually intentionally trying to rebalance, to work through that which has unbalanced me. I think we turn to those things a lot, just, maybe painting, Sadie, or drawing, right, is something that rebalances you, recenters you. We turn to it almost intuitively sometimes because it gets us, and a lot of those things are meditative in a sense. They get us off the hamster wheel of our mind that's doing this and causing a lot of our stress, and letting us take a step back and get a little bit of perspective and being a little bit more objective. So we have that clarity to look at life. Now, I am not saying that balance makes us immovable. Me standing here with my knees bent is not about me not being able to move at all, but really it was about, when she pushed me from behind, it was about me actually being able to catch myself. Now, if my knees had been locked, it could have been uglier. Balance is, again, about being able to go with whatever's happening in a way that doesn't totally throw you overboard and get you wet, right? To continue our metaphor. So let me share a story with you. Anne Fullerton told the story about her father. So her father, she went to pick him up one day at the ferry. He was coming off the ferry from the mainland to his little island that he'd lived on for most of his life. His name is Norman. He's 93 years old. Now the ferry is like the main connection of everybody on the island to one another and to everything outside, right? But at ferry time, at boat time, every day, a lot of people would come and gather, and they'd just come to see what the news was, or catch up with one another, or make plans with each other. And Norman was a favorite on the island because he was kind and he was respectful and he liked to talk to everybody and find out what was going on with everyone. It had gotten harder lately because now he was, legally blind and didn't hear very well. And so he used to be able to greet somebody and go, "Marilyn, oh, it's so good to see you." And now it was sort of a, "Now tell me who you are," so that he knew who he was talking to. Well, this particular day, when he got off the ferry, his daughter could tell that he wasn't himself. He was uncharacteristically avoiding everybody else. trying to stay away from other people and not make contact, and seemed to be looking sort of furtively for her. And finally she called out, and he came over and he grabbed her by the arm and he led her over to their golf cart, and they got in and he started telling her about his day. He said, well, he took the ferry over to the mainland because he was having issues with his dentures. So he went to the dentist, and the dentist kept his dentures to fix them. So he spent the whole rest of the day doing everything he needed to do over there, using public transportation and going shopping and hailing a cab and interacting with other people, all without his teeth. So this poor old guy who couldn't see, couldn't hear, and now had no teeth, had a rough day, and he was done and ready to go home. And as she's trying to come up with something comforting and helpful to say to him, he turns and he looks directly at her and he says, you know, I'm learning to love what is. I'm learning to love what is. And I think that's part of keeping our balance. So while it's being aware of how we're feeling and when we're off balance and seeking to do something that helps us maintain our balance, it's also about being able to look at life from a standpoint of saying, I'm trying to love what is. Even while I may be trying to move into what can be, there's an acceptance about this moment as it is that tends to bring balance back. Does that make sense? No, doesn't make sense. We'll talk. Because if we can accept this place as we stand in that position, it enables us to perhaps clearly see where we go from here, or clearly how to respond. To understand that this moment, even as icky as sometimes it may be, is still a good moment. So I offer all of that to you today as we intentionally walk through these Lenten days. May we do it with awareness. May we seek our balance. May we try to learn to love what is. Amen.